All right, so we still have a couple of people that are trying to log on, but we're going to go ahead and get the program started. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their Wednesday to come and join us. We've brought I'm Alex Warner with the Forsyth County Chamber of Commerce, and we have teamed up with the Gainesville Small Business Development Center. And I want to turn it over to Molly Knight to introduce herself, and we're going to briefly go into the PPP Flexibility Act that has been passed, and then talk about the updates in PPP. But then at the end of the program, we're going to turn it over to all the businesses so that we can do an actual Q&A for all of the questions that you have lingering. There are probably a bunch of them because nobody is quite sure how the forgiveness portion of PPP is going to work. So anything that we can do to help get your answers or your questions answered, we'll be here at the end of the program to handle that. So without further ado, turn it over to Molly Knight.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning. Thank y'all for joining us to get a quick update on what's going on with PPP. Before we kind of jump into the meat and potatoes of the loan program and changes and updates, I just wanted to introduce myself and my team, as well as the Small Business Development Center. In case you guys are not familiar with who we are and what we do and how we can help your business, we like to touch on that in case we could be of assistance. As Alex mentioned, my name is Molly Knight. I'm the program coordinator in our Gainesville Center. I'm joined by Patrick Fulbright, our area director, who's going to get into the PPP in just a minute, as well as Robbie Parks, our business consultant, who's going to help facilitate some of the Q&A at the end. So the three of us are in our Gainesville Center. We cover the 13 northeast counties of Georgia. We've got 17 small business development centers across the state that are a part of America's Small Business Development Center, which is a nationwide network. Here in Georgia, we're particularly blessed to have backing from the University of Georgia, so we're kind of a quasi-state federal program to assist small businesses. We are one of the public service and outreach units at the University of Georgia, so that's a subset of the university that serves citizens. We provide three main functions here at the SBDC, and this is what I tell folks. So if one of these sparks your interest and we can be of help for your business, do not hesitate to let us know. The first, what we're the most known for, is our one-on-one no-cost consulting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second and what that could look like for your business. But that's where you would sit down one-on-one over Zoom or a phone call, or eventually in person again, hopefully someday, and talk with Patrick or Robbie about what obstacles or opportunities your business may be facing. The second piece that we serve is our continuing education training, and that is similar to our one-on-one consulting, but in a more group setting atmosphere. So this would be a great example, this webinar, of that group setting continuing education training that we do. And then the third piece is our market research assistance, and that kind of works hand in hand with our training and consulting. Being a part of the university, we've got access to some pretty robust market research databases, so we can help pull reports for you if you maybe are looking to open a second location and want to look at traffic patterns of a certain address, or you are trying to reach new customers and want to look at the demographics in your area, or you want to look at purchasing patterns of people in your territory. So those are just some examples of different types of reports we could help pull for you. So those are the three functions that we serve. I did want to briefly mention what it looks like to become an SBDC client. A lot of folks who have sat in on these webinars are then like, okay, well, how do I get in touch with a consultant? Where do I go from here? So I wanted to put this graphic up to give you a little bit of an idea of how you could work with us and what that would look like. So this is a wheel of an 8-step process. Some of the steps you might skip, or some you might do more than once, but the first is contacting us and learning about us. So maybe you learned about us on this webinar, maybe you looked up our website and you want to contact us from there. So you would call our office and we'll have contact information at the end. Email or phone call works for us. And then from there, you would get in touch with me first. I would be kind of your first point of contact. And so I would want to learn about your business. And so that's that number 3 step, is that possible BDQ. BDQ stands for Business Development Questionnaire. And that's something that we use sometimes to get a better idea of where you're at in your business process. So if you have a business plan, I might ask you to send that instead of the BDQ. That's just an easier way for us to get an idea of where you're at in your business. And after I've learned as much as I can about your business and relayed that on to one of our consultants and gotten you set up with someone, we would make an appointment. And once you've got an appointment with us, you could meet with a consultant, and then it's very needs-based. So we would try to figure out your goals, where you're going, and develop a plan of action with you. And from there, our training piece works hand in hand with that. So maybe you work with a consultant and you attend a training about reaching customers on LinkedIn, or maybe you attend a training about finance for small business or QuickBooks or whatever that might look like for your business. And along the way, you kind of go back through those 5, 6, 7, 8 steps and remain a client of the SBDC. You might meet with your consultant again and develop another plan of action and meet your goals, develop new goals. So that can be very cyclical and can look however you want it to look. Maybe there's one obstacle that you want to face and then we don't hear from you for a couple of months, or maybe you want to develop a regular relationship with a consultant. And so we can kind of meet you where you are in as far as meeting the goals of your business. So I just wanted to briefly mention that so you are a little bit more aware of how you can work with us. I'm going to turn things over to Patrick in just a second, but if you are interested in becoming a client of the SBDC, our contact information will be at the end of this slide deck. I will provide these slides to Alex as well so they can be emailed out to everyone who registered. So do not hesitate to contact us if we could be of further assistance for your business. But without further ado, I'm going to hand things back over to Patrick to get into some of this meat and potatoes of the paycheck protection changes.
Thanks, Molly, and thank you, Alex and Forsyth Chamber. I think this is probably our 4th or 5th time doing a webinar as a partner with the Forsyth Chamber, so we love this partnership, and again, as Molly mentioned, we're here to help you. So the PPP Flexibility Act, there's several changes that I'm going to go over, and also I'm going to update the attendees with some more information. As with all these, I want to put a caveat out there that this is the best information we have right now. As you probably realize and have seen, there are constant changes to the PPP, how to account for things, what's forgiveness, what's not, definitions, or what I would say more clarity on how to account for things that are coming out from the SBA and Treasury. Interpretations. There's a lot on social media. There's a lot of YouTube videos, information that are out there. Some are correct, some are not. So if you run across a issue with your business and you believe you're doing the right thing, but you want to shore it up, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be glad to take a look at your situation and take a look at your different math and accounting for it to help you with that, especially on the forgiveness side. So let me hop right in here. One of the first things that come up, as you know, this past on July 4th, President Trump signed an extension to the PPP, which as of last week, it was over with, but now we have an extension. So ironically, if you haven't applied for PPP, you have another chance to do that. And from my perspective, I would encourage you to do that, and we can help with that, help that decision making. But this is monies that, with some of these other changes under the Flexibility Act, are very attractive. I like to use the word cheap money. If you're still struggling, if your business is not back to where it was, or you're still struggling to get there, the PPP could be an avenue that you could take advantage of to help your business. One of the other things they announced, the SBA and Treasury, as you can see on the slide, they set aside $10 billion for community development financial institutions. These are called CDIFs. These are companies very similar to financial institutions. They have some relationship with SBA that allows them to help with some of the interest rates. And in this case, it's not that prevalent because it's still stuck, or it's still tied to 1%. But they gave them some more money, and so $10 billion is a great pile of cash that can help small businesses. They really finance for low-income areas or struggling economic areas, but if you'd like to take a look, we have a link there. If you might think you might qualify, this is another avenue for a financial institution to help you with the PPP funding. All right, next slide. So getting right into the whole PPP, before I mention, thanks, I forgot about this. One of the other tools or instruments that SBA brought online is the Main Street loan. This is for small to medium-sized businesses. You have to have less than 15,000 employees, less than $5 billion in revenue. They're really looking at businesses with strong cash flow for 2019 to qualify. The loan terms are LIBOR plus 3% for 5 years. There is a deferral for 1 year on the interest payments and a 2-year deferral on the actual principal payments. This is a greater amount of money than some smaller businesses would go after, but the minimum size loan is $250,000, $250,000. The portal opened on June 15th. Now, this is also done through your financial institutions, your banks. So they are your partner for Main Street loans. If you're interested or you think you might qualify, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at the SBDC. We can put you in touch with a loan specialist that can help you through this Main Street loan. Normally, when it says small to medium-sized business, you're looking at businesses that are usually a little bigger. So you're in the multi-million-dollar range of revenue that would qualify for the Main Street. Just going to put that out there because some folks say, well, I've got the PP, I want to go after the Main. You can, but again, the qualifications are a little stiffer. And again, the interest rate's different here than the PPP. Okay, let's go to the next one. So as I mentioned earlier, this whole Flexibility Act was signed on June 5th. It really just modifies the current PPP Act. And the areas that it really hit on, which is fantastic because this was somewhat of a struggle for a lot of businesses. And some of the logic behind that was that covered period, and we're going to use the term covered period. That covered period is that forgiveness period. It went from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. The reason they did this is businesses, and they have in Washington, they have focus groups and task force that are really looking at what are the struggles for the small business person. And what they found was the onboarding of employees back to work and those revenues or sales that are coming back to the business were not happening. And this was one of the bases they used to say, okay, let's be fair here. We're not having the revenue, we're not having the sales, we're having struggles with employees. Let's move this out. Let's give them a break out to 24 weeks. So that forgiveness period, and again, they use the language covered period, has moved from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. Most of the rules still apply, but we're going to get into some particulars that are different this time. One of the other things that was amazing, they extended the loan term from 2 years to 5 years. Now, this applies to loans issued after June 5th. So if you have one that's before June 5th, the lender, they don't require it, but permits lenders and you as a small business person, as a bar, to mutually agree that you can extend your terms prior to your loan if you received it before June 5th. Here's the other thing that's amazing with this extension on the Flexibility Act. They've now deferred the payment to start your repayment from 6 to 10 plus months. And the reason I put 10 plus in there is because you actually have to see the weeks that are involved in there, because now if you so choose, you can pay your PPP through forgiveness. If you have any residual as far as the loan after you pay forgiveness, then you can pay it back early. But if you so choose, you're deferred now up to 10 plus months. And I'll show you a graphic on that on the next slide. Probably one of the most important things that came out of this also is that reduced minimum payroll requirement. So you might say, Patrick, why did they do that? Well, some businesses don't have that many employees. So when we were talking about 75% of this PPP going toward payroll, that really didn't help some businesses that have less or smaller amount of employees. So they lowered that amount to 60%. The bonus to that is that they increased the non-payroll expense side of the equation to 40% instead of 25%. For small businesses, this could be very advantageous, and I would encourage you to take a hard look at those allowable expenses that you could qualify now so you don't have to use all that payroll. Again, minimum requirement went from 75 to 60% on payroll. And you might say, well, Patrick, what if I still have more employees? Can I use more than that 60%? You absolutely can. So that's just a bench for allowing that additional 40% to be carved out for non-payroll expense. I want to pause there for a couple things. One, previous PPP webinars, we have talked about questions around utilities. One of the things that we got clarified, or what I would call kind of a clawback, it really was kind of a gray area, was vehicles and gas for those vehicles, as that was an allowable expense. Well, SBA came back and Treasury said, no, it's not. You cannot claim fuel for your company vehicles as a utility expense. What they defined as transportation expense was transportation tax that is typical in certain states and municipalities. Here in our area, we don't really have any of that, so that's been clawed back. The other thing that came up that I wanted to mention before I forget about it is owner's draws. So originally, owner's draws were part of that PPP calculation. There's been clarity to that. Owner's draws do not count for that PPP loan and can't be done for forgiveness. Now, before you freak out on that, you can still use your net profit line for your business as still part of that PPP forgiveness. If you had used that calculation as an owner's draw, and the logic behind that was really the tax. So on a lot of the owner's draws for businesses, and majority of them, they don't take tax out. It's up to that partner or that business owner to pay their quarterly estimated tax or tax on it or self-employment tax. A lot of times, sometimes that doesn't occur. So they clawed that back and said, no, it has to be based off the net profit lines of the business, whether you're a sole proprietor or LLC, in some cases of an S corp. But that's a big change. You're still, as far as the net profit line, based on if you have a partnership, you would take the percentage of your partnership for that net profit line. You can work that into the calculation. The other part of that is on that forgiveness, that can be counted at the same amount. If you're a sole proprietor, they're going to look at your Schedule C, line 31. So that's a lot of information really quick in that part. If you have some questions around that, don't hesitate to get with us. Talk to your financial institution or whatever institution you got your PPP from. They'll know this new change, and if you've taken it or you originally had it in your PPP loan calculation, all that you're going to be out is possibly that part could not be forgiven. So that is something that you're going to have to work in your strategy going forward. That could be the part of that 24 and that 24 week that you can't claim. Then that will turn into a 1% loan amount that you could pay back. One other thing I want to mention, and it was one of the questions that came out of our last webinar with Forsyth, what about the interest? Well, the interest still accrues. So of the loan, whatever you don't or ask for forgiveness or can claim for forgiveness will turn into a 1% loan. During that deferral period, that interest still accrues. So that was some questions that came out with that. All right, let's go on to the next slide, Molly. So here's that rule that came out. As you probably remember, we get these IFRs. So it's the interim final rule. So these are the ones that are constantly moving and changing or being redefined, or clarities come out through it. So the big part of the new one, they call it IFR 19, released on June 17th. I think there's already another one out on the June 22nd, but namely they changed or clawed back some things from IFR 3 and IFR 6. Namely, they integrated the changes to loan term forgiveness, the calculations that was going for the 24 weeks, and also the deferral period, and also the amount of the owner's compensation you claim is 2.5 times your monthly average. This is back to my conversation I just had about that net profit line. It's still based on your 2019 average net income, and then you still get to multiply it by 2.5. However, that 100,000 limit baseline still is in play. So even as an owner or a partner of a business, you're still capped at the 100,000 and your employees also. We talked about the 24 period. Anyone with a loan before June 5th, you can still use the 8 weeks. The banks can hold you to that. They're not required to give you the 24 if you've got it before June 5th, but they encourage to talk to the bar and the bank to negotiate that and see if they'll allow you to go out through the 24 weeks. Okay, next slide. This one, revolutionary. I don't know how many have looked at the original forgiveness form. It looked like a tax form. It was pretty laborious. You actually had to work backwards through the form. Well, on June 17th, they released a modified form for the Flexibility Act. They added some new language to it, and of course, some of the changes, but they created a short form, and it's called 3508 EZ. Again, government likes that easy, and I guess they're trying to tell us it's going to be easy. Well, it's not as laborious as the other one. So it's really designed for self-employed, or if you have no employees. Or, one of the key points, you did not reduce your salary or wages of your employees by more than 25%, or did not reduce the number of hours for your employees. The other part, if you experience reduction in your business activity as a result of health directives related to COVID-19, and you did not reduce the salaries or wages of employees by more than 25%. One of the things that came out of this, and it's somewhat of a clarity, is that let's say you're a business and you have done your due diligence and sent notes to your employees to come back to work. A percentage of those employees, and originally it was 25%, it's still in that range, but if you have done your due diligence, you have contacted your employees and they have refused to come back to work, you are allowed now, and it's somewhat like a little safe harbor, that you can account for that. So you have done your due diligence, you have documented, and I have to stress, you have to have documentation that you have gone back to your employees and told them to come back to work, and this works into your total full-time equivalent calculation, then you are able to take their salaries off from your forgiveness. So you can get that forgiven. Again, it has to be documented, and you have to have some type of documentation from those employees that they're refusing to come back. I would recommend that you do a separation on those employees. Unless, they can still apply for unemployment, especially if they have COVID-19 reasons, childcare, somebody ill at home themselves, ill with COVID-19, but you've done your due diligence and you can claim that under your forgiveness. So that's a little bit of a clarity with the forgiveness side. You can also use that strategy if you don't have PPP. Look at your partial unemployment, especially as you're gaining sales back. That might be a strategy you want to incorporate, and we can talk to you more about that through the SBDC in Gainesville. The other part of that is you can't do both. So you can't apply for short-term unemployment, partial unemployment, and the PPP. It has to be one or the other. Same thing with tax credits. You can't take tax credits and the PPP. Okay, Molly, next slide. So we put this slide in. I say we. At the SBDC, as Molly mentioned earlier, we have 17 offices across the state of Georgia. We have our own task team that analyzes and decipher, interpret the things that are coming out of SBA. We have a liaison that works with the Office of Disaster Assistance, and we're constantly in communication. So we put these type of charts together to help with understanding how things are moving. So originally the PPP loan was 1%. The flex came in at 1%. That final impact is still 1%. As I mentioned when I started, this is really inexpensive money. Those that have had business loans before, where you've had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% interest rate, cheap money. And this is something that I would encourage you as a business owner, if you haven't taken advantage of the PPP, remember it's been extended out through August 8th. Take advantage of it. Go see your financial institution. We started the conversation, Alex, before the webinar. There are some banks that are not going to open up their portals for PPP applicants, but I can tell you a few that are. I know Chase, Bank of America, Affinity, Renaissance, and I believe there's one other one that Alex mentioned. You might at the end be able to tell me that again, that are open. As we find out more banks are opening portals to accept new applicants, we'll get that information out to the Forsyth Chamber members. The beauty, as I mentioned earlier, the term for this loan went from 2 years to 5 years. Again, if you were before June 5th, you got to go back to your financial institution, talk to them, see if you can modify the loan to push it out. Deferral period, we'll come back to that, 10 plus months. Again, that deferral period, just to define it, you see my note to the right, it begins at the end of the covered period. It begins at the end of that 24 weeks or begins at the end of your 8 weeks, whichever you choose. You do not have to, on your own, change your payment back or forgiveness from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. That's up to you and your bank, your financial institution. You can definitely elect just to do your 8 weeks. You don't have to, even with the bank's approval, move it to 24 weeks. Again, we talked about the 60%. The beauty of this, too, is that non-payroll expense has been extended up to 40% to maximum. This is great, advantageous, especially for over 24 weeks. There should be a great strategy that you could potentially get all of that funding forgiven since it's been extended out for that 24 weeks. Okay, Molly, let's go to that next graph. So we put together this revised deferral period timeline just to give you a visual and graphic to show you how this really would work. So we put up there an example. If a borrower of a PPP loan is dispersed on June 5th, 2020, the 24-week period will end on December 10th. So remember, that's the definition of our covered period. So if it ends on December 10th, then that's when your deferral begins. So in actuality, you will have another 10 months before you have to begin payment back. Now, your interest rate does accrue during this time, but not principal. So in actuality, the borrower will not have to, if you do not submit a loan forgiveness by October 10th, the borrower then will begin making their payments after October 10th, 2021. So you've got plenty of breathing room in this period of time before you have to make payments back. And again, this is only if you don't pay it back during forgiveness or if you don't qualify for total forgiveness on that dollar amount that you had originally figured on your PPP loan. So this only means if you have converted from not having enough dollars in there to get forgiven, that residual will turn into a loan, and this is what we're talking about as the deferral amount. As far as that covered period, if you pay back during that covered period, then your loan is satisfied and you're done with that PPP loan. But if it happens to be you have a residual, it turns into that 1% loan. It doesn't have to be paid till after October 10th, in this case, 2021. Pretty exciting change to the whole time period. Okay, I do have one other slide I was going to show you on this time helping out. Actually, I got two more. This came up to timelines and on a covered period as far as a safe harbor. This was a calculation for full-time equivalents. So originally, non-payroll costs must be in place by this date. You remember the February 15th cutoff? That was what we called the FTE safe harbor. And then we also had a wage reduction baseline period that was between January 1 to 3/31. So this was where we had wages of employees that were reduced. We had to put that in the calculation. They slid this somewhat to a safe harbor calculation period. They moved it from February 15th to March 26th. And this was the new dates that they put in for calculate your full-time equivalent employees during this period. Now with the end of the 6/30, that was the original safe harbor date. Now it's moved out with this new PPP to 8/8. That could change, so just be aware that we will update you on those different dates. Again, on their PPP forgiveness period at 24 weeks, if you were deposited on that 6/25, you're all the way to December 10th. And then this new revised safe harbor is moved to 12/31. That's the end of your FTE safe harbor date. So originally it was 6/30, now it's been moved out to 12/30. I said 8/8, or it's actually out to 12/31. 8/8 is the start of the new, or the end of the open enrollment, or the application process for the new PPP. But that FTE, to calculate that, is moved out to 12/31. So this gives you, in that 24 period, to onboard your employees back in to grab as much forgiveness as you can. I put some notes below there. One, I want you to look at number 2. Calculate wages during this period to establish baseline to compare to your wages during your covered period. And again, remember that percentage has gone to 60%. This example assumes that we were funded on June 25th, like the other example. And alternatively, you may use the first day of the payroll period immediately following your PPP deposited date. So one of the things that they are allowed is if payroll is done on the next month after you've been if you've got funds deposited prior to that next first of the month as your payroll is being paid, you're able to slide your date to account for that payroll period. So that's a little bit of a change than it was previously. And if you have questions around that, we can help you with that. All right, the next slide we added into, this is just a reference period for your FTE calculations. One of the ones that I wanted to bring your attention to, if you're a seasonal business, then you are allowed to have a shorter window for calculation initially for your PPP loan amount. And that was May 1st, 2019 through September 15th, 2019. And then there is a short reference period. If you're a new business, you are able to capture those employee counts between January 1, 2020 and February 29, 2020. So that was something that was added later, but I wanted to bring it up today. Okay, Molly, let's go to the next slide. All right, so just somewhat recap. So here is the key things to remember. We didn't change this, but it's now August 8th is your authorization, in a sense, deadline. I would recommend, again, as I started this whole conversation, if you haven't applied for PPP, do it today. Don't wait. Get into the portals with your financial institution. If you need help with that, we have a list. The SBA has a list for Georgia. We can get a company, a financial institution to work with you. We'll find one. Also, the fintech companies, financial technology companies, are still doing PPP. That's like PayPal, Intuit with QuickBooks, Cabbage, a few other ones out there. We can get you those names also. Some of those move a little faster because everything's electronic with them. We put this comment in here. This is from one of my other ADs. He says, don't let your appetite for loan forgiveness lead you to making a bad business decisions. I stress, if you haven't got the PPP, look at it. Again, it's really looking at your whole business. If you've come back and your business is doing okay, you got your employees back, PPP might not be an option for you. It could be an idle, and it could be something like that, or it could be an alternative financing avenue. So you really need to take a look at your whole business, the business strategy, things going forward. How, as some of you might have attended our pivot class that we had, how is your business pivoting? Is this a instrument that you want to incorporate? Majority of the time, I would say yes. And it goes back to those allowable expenses for payroll, for non-payroll expense, things that you can, up to 40% of those non-payroll that you can account for forgiveness. Majority of businesses, based on their initial calculation on their loan amount, with that extension of 24 periods, should make a large percentage, if not all, of your loan be able to be forgiven. So this is pretty exciting. Think of it as a loan that's turned into a grant because of that forgiveness. Similar if the businesses received a EIDL advance, that was already forgiven, not the loan, the advance. So this is just like that. It's turned into, if you can get that 100% forgiveness, it's almost turned like you got a grant. At the end of that period, once you've paid back that loan or through forgiveness, then that is closed. You have satisfied that loan requirement. We put this in here. Remember 3 main things: document, document, document. As we talked before, if you do get PPP money, EIDL money, advance money, put it in a separate business account and document, document, document. Keep your documents, and you need to retain them. Some of the new regulations, as we have seen, is up to 11 years. Again, electronic storage is fine on that kind of documentation, but just know that it's easier to keep it segregated. Try not to commingle the funds, and keep good records. Use your payroll company, if you have one, to help you with that documentation on those payroll forgiveness amounts. Additional guidance on forgiveness will be coming. As we march through this new Flexibility Act, there's going to be clarifications and probably some other changes. So as we understand it and decipher and be able to communicate that out, we will. I'll get with Alex. We'll get it to the Forsyth Chamber members of changes that impact your business through forgiveness. Okay, Molly, the next screen. I think this is our key link screen. Yeah. So we put this out here. These are the links for SBA, document side, and Treasury. These are updated documents that continue to come out on FAQs, explanations, more of a deeper dive on unique situations. They do it as a Q&A type of situation. They'll give you a question and then they'll answer it, the SBA does. The Treasury uses an FAQ format for their PPP information. And again, use us also if you have a unique situation or if you're what I call getting in the weeds with some details that you can't find either SBA or Treasury, or you haven't come through a webinar, then we'll be glad to help you also. All right. I think we're going to open up for Q&A, and I think we're going to turn it over to Robbie. You're going to be asking some of that.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, we have some questions, and Alex mentioned, and I will reiterate, if you have questions, please put those in the chat, and we will try to get to all of those. We also have some questions that have come in advance, so we'll start with those and then get to the chat. So how should a borrower account for federal taxes or FICA and Medicare when determining its payroll cost for the purposes of the maximum loan amount and allowable uses and forgiveness for the PPP?
So one of the things that was changed as we went through the PPP loan process initially was FICA. So originally that calculation could be grabbed on the initial loan, but what has come out after that underneath the forgiveness is that FICA has to be deducted on the employer side. They can't account for that as forgiveness. Now on the medical side, all that can be accounted for forgiveness. So two differentiations there. That FICA on the employer side has to be deducted for forgiveness, but on the medical, and that includes retirement funds contributions, can be part of your forgiveness calculation.
Okay, we have a question about the EIDL, and that is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And I'll just make a quick distinction. So there's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and then there's the advance. And the advance is the amount up to $10,000 that's based on employee count. So what we're talking about right now is the EIDL advance, not the actual loan. So someone received an EIDL advance in addition to the PPP. And so, of course, they want to make sure they didn't double dip. So how does forgiveness with the PPP work with the EIDL advance?
So I would be really clear on what you can account for the EIDL side and what for the PPP side. So you've heard that term double dipping. You can't use payroll expense side stuff for EIDL. You really need to segregate it for the PPP. The other part of that is for the EIDL advance. That is one amount I told you earlier about. It's forgiven. Yes, you don't have to repay it. However, if you did receive an EIDL advance, you must subtract that amount from your forgiveness under PPP. You don't have to subtract any EIDL loan dollars, just the advance, EIDL advance from your PPP forgiveness. Again, those are viewed as this was contributions to shore up the business. And so it's in a form, they see it as you could have double dipped with this as a form of a grant or an advance. So you need to keep them segregated. Best practice also, in my opinion, I know it's a pain, but I would even segregate your EIDL from your PPP just to keep the accounting clear without having any double dipping or commingling of the funds for certain allowable expenses. Keeping the PPP for your payroll and non-payroll expenses and your EIDL for like receivables you didn't get, payables, disruptions in supply chain, things you have to shore up your business, debts, where you keep the PPP for the payroll and non-payroll expenses just segregated. I would recommend that. Okay, Robbie.
All right, yes, definitely. Document, document, document. So what if I received a PPP loan and gave back the money because my business wasn't ready to open? Can I apply again?
Unfortunately, you cannot. And the reason for that is that they see, when I say they see, the SBA sees that loan as you have satisfied that loan. And part of that stimulus language was that there was only one PPP per business. So unfortunately, even though we've expanded into this August 8th, you cannot reapply even if you've paid it back, and you can't apply a second time. If you've already got PPP money, doesn't mean you can go after some more PPP money. It's really one time, and if you paid it or refused it, then you're not allowed to go back and reapply.
Okay. And so regarding lenders, this is something that we know all too well. When the PPP was launched, lots of folks had trouble finding a lender who would take their application. So how is that working now? Is it still hard to find a lender?
There's going to be some lenders that are not going to extend to the August 8th deadline. So I think originally there's like 5,500 different lenders out there. But banks, fintechs, the CDIFs that I mentioned earlier, those community development financial institutions, they're a great source for the second round or this extension. I won't say second round, this extension of the PPP deadline. That deadline again is really for the SBA to send the SBA approved document or the approved number for the application. So as I mentioned earlier, please don't hesitate to apply. I would say if you haven't applied by the end of July, then you're probably going to be really late getting there because, again, that 8/8 date, that August 8th date, is for the SBA to get the application SBA numbers back to those financial institutions. So do it as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Again, we'll send out Go ahead, Robbie.
Oh no, I was going to say we definitely saw that with the original deadline, that some banks were cutting it off a week early even because of processing time.
And we will, as I mentioned earlier, I know Chase, BOA, Affinity, and Renaissance, and another one that Alice will probably mention are some of the banks that we know of. We will make sure that we keep on sending that out as we hear other banks are accepting PPP applications.
All right. What if my business was unprofitable last year?
So if it was not profitable, the PPP is going to be hard for you to apply for. They're going to look at your bank. Remember, the financial institutions are on the front line here. They're going to take a look at your profitability of the business. If you did not make funds or you didn't have net income, that could be a decision that the bank makes that you're not a candidate for the PPP. I would look toward EIDL. EIDL has some different requirements in that as far as what they're looking for, especially anything under $25,000. So most likely, if you weren't profitable for 2019 or even the first 2 months of 2020, that's allowable, then I would look at EIDL as a possibility for funding.
All right. So we have someone, their company received loan funds on May 7th, but had already processed the payroll for the 15th. Can they transfer or reimburse the amount of the May 15th payroll from their PPP money to the main checking account? And would that be legit for forgiveness?
Yes, there's an allowance now, but because of the way payroll works, that they'll allow you to slide it to your next payroll processing period. So yes, you should be able to process that payroll, and that would be part of your forgiveness. If you have any questions around that, I would go back to your bank to make sure that that's the way they see that rule is stated. But I'm going to say yes, if it was payroll on the 15th, then you can pay it through that forgiveness period.
All right. And are there caps on the amount of loan forgiveness available for owner employees and self-employed individuals' own payroll compensation?
Yes, there's still that 100,000 limit, and when you divide that out, originally it was like 15,535 or some number. It's now, because of 24 weeks, has gone up to that $20,000 limit. I would work with your bookkeeper, your payroll company, to make sure you're following those rules. That's the limit of that loan forgiveness, and it's really still based off the 100,000 cap for when you initially did your calculation for the PPP loan amount. That goes for your employees also. That 100,000 is for employees too, so it's capped there. But because of the forgiveness period, that dollar amount has actually gone up because of the 24 week period.
All right, and we need clarification on forgiveness. So we had someone who furloughed for 4 weeks, but everyone is back and at the same or higher rate of compensation. As they did furlough for a month, is that considered a reduction even though they are all back to the pre-COVID numbers?
This will go back to that safe harbor when they were brought back on. And if you remember that chart I'd shown, that's going to, if they came back and that was your full-time equivalence period, then you're going to be able to capture that forgiveness for those period of time they're back. That furlough period, I would say you're going to have to reduce that amount. That's going to be in that, originally that 25% reduction. That rule still sticks. So I say you would subtract it, but it's going to be part of that 25 allowable forgiveness. So you're going to have to look at the math there. You're going to have to take those salaries, multiply them out, and see if they fit in the total, the 25% to total, and see if that amount would satisfy that requirement. If it does, then it can be applied to forgiveness. So if it depends on that total amount of dollars you're talking about. And just know that FTE safe harbor window has slid. So you might now, it might be part of that you can account for all of that, but if not, then see if it will apply for that 25 reduction in payroll, and see if you can make that, and working with your financial institution, make sure they agree with you that you can account for that as part of that reduction for forgiveness.
And speaking
Hopefully
of
that makes sense.
FTE, is FTE considered 30 hours or does it have to be 40 hours?
So there was some questions around this earlier. I would say if your company defines full-time as 30 hours, then that's going to be a full-time equivalent. That would be an FTE. A lot of businesses look at 40 as the FTE. The federal government, even pre-COVID, had defined part or full-time equivalent at above 30 hours, 30 and above. So I would, again, look at your financial institution, see what their definition of that is, but I would go ahead and count 30 hours and above if that is historically how you account for full-time employees in your business. And again, that can be done by looking at your payroll company, how you fill out your I-9 and requirements for that job.
All right, and that is the last question from the chat, unless anyone has others. And if you do, please go ahead and put those in the chat now. Okay, we just had another one come in. We received the PPP loan and hired back 10 days later, which was the following pay cycle. Does that help towards forgiveness?
When you hired back, so you got your loan, so when you hired back, it was within that covered period. That's the key. It has to be during that, when you brought back your FTE. Now, there can be, because of the definition, and you saw that graphic, you're giving a little bit of a safe harbor there. But if it fell into that, even with another pay cycle, then you can apply that to forgiveness. It has to satisfy that chart that we showed earlier, that graphic. But if it fell in within that covered period, then absolutely you can account for it.
And just as a reminder, we are going to share these slides with Alex so that he can get them out to everyone. So you'll actually have the chart and everything that Patrick is referencing, so that you'll have that for your records. Okay, that looks like the last question. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you to close us out. Okay.
Thank you all for the questions, and great. If you need more clarity, as Robbie mentioned, Molly earlier, we're here to help you. If we get into some unique situations and we need more clarity or more information, we can get that for you. Again, I mentioned earlier, we have a task team that's all they're working on constantly is deciphering and getting the information out from the SBA and Treasury that we can help clients. We know it's confusing. We know it's changing. As y'all probably that have been on these calls, we don't like to claw back stuff, but we're just trying to give you the most up-to-date information as we can. And just know the one thing that we can be certain, there's going to be some more changes. So we think we know what it's define it today. I'm sure there's going to be some more stuff come out, and we'll get that information to you as soon as we can, because it is impacting your business and how you can apply for forgiveness or if it converts to a loan. Just want to make a quick note about that. Don't fret if you don't get 100% forgiveness, especially with some of this information along the owner's draws. It's cheap money. You're deferred for 10 plus months after the covered period. And again, the interest will accrue, but at 1%, that's not a whole lot of dollars we're talking about. It should be enough time to get you back on your feet and be able to pay off whatever residual of the loan you still have to take care of. If the PPP is not a strategy for you, there is a thing called bridge loans that are a little higher in interest, but some financial institutions are offering them. We also have some alternative financing avenues that we can help you with also. If you've gone through your PPP money, again, there's these options that we can help you with to try to find another avenue for your business for funding. And on our screen, and I'm going to probably turn it over to Molly if you have any closing comments also, Molly.
Yeah, just kind of reiterating what we said at the beginning. Do not hesitate to contact us if we can be of further assistance. Email or phone works. If we miss you on the phone, please leave a detailed voicemail with your callback information, and we'll get back with you as soon as we can.
Okay, Alex, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, and thank you again for Molly, Robbie, and Patrick for putting this on. We've got, as everyone knows, lots of questions surrounding all of this, and everything is continuously going to be changing. So we'll do our best to keep you up to date. And for the bank that we could not remember, it is Georgia Primary here in downtown Cumming. Georgia Primary Bank is also accepting customers at this time for PPP loans. So if anyone needs anything, please either reach out to the SBDC, reach out to myself. I'll be more than happy to put you in touch with Patrick and his team as well. But until next time, we will see everyone later. And thanks everyone for joining us this morning.